Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, and with the release of season 2 of Wolf Hall, I'm going to be going back through season 1 and then season 2 and telling you all of the Easter eggs and references I found in each episode. Please note that this is not a review, nor is it a what was accurate video, as this is adapted from historical fiction. We're going to start with the episode title. 3-card trick. The title comes from a game that Cromwell plays with Cardinal Wolsey in this episode. The trick is also called Follow the Lady. The name of the episode and the trick itself is a game of deception, which is very symbolic of politics in general, let alone at the Tudor court. You could also argue that this is a reflection of Cromwell himself as he navigates the Tudor court and how he is able to rise through Henry's ranks. A game he plays time and time again until he ultimately loses in 1540. The episode takes place in 1529 and portrays Cardinal Wolsey's fall from power. It includes 3 long flashbacks, each introduced with captions: 8 years earlier, 18 months before Wolsey's fall, and 4 months before Wolsey's fall. The main narrative also jumps forward after the second flashback, with the caption 3 weeks after Wolsey's fall. In the first extended flashback, however, 2 distinct time periods are shown, though only the first is captioned. Initially, we see Cromwell beginning his post with Wolsey. We see a snippet of Chateau Vert, which happened in 1522, roughly 8 years earlier, where we see Anne Boleyn playing Perseverance, and she is seen talking to Courage, who is Henry, known as Harry Percy. The only thing is, there was not a male role called Courage, and from all the accounts that I've read, Henry Percy was in the audience, not participating. This is relevant as Anne and Henry Percy were courting, and even considered themselves betrothed to one another in around 1522. But the pair were forced to separate. In the show, Wolsey commands Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, to get your daughter to marry Ireland. This is a reference to the dispute over the earldom of Ormond. Basically, on the 3rd of August 1515, Thomas Butler, the 7th Earl of Ormond and grandfather of Thomas Boleyn, died in his late 80s. As one of England's wealthiest noblemen, he left an inheritance exceeding £40,000 and held both Irish and English peerages, Earl and Baron of Ormond. With no male heirs, he left 2 daughters, Anne and Margaret. Margaret, who was married to Sir William Boleyn, mother of Thomas Boleyn. The Irish estates were managed by their cousin, Sir James Butler, who saw himself as the estate's owner. After Thomas Butler's death, Sir James Butler's son, Sir Piers, claimed the inheritance, viewing himself as the rightful heir, since Thomas Butler only had daughters. However, as the Ormond title was inheritable by heirs general and not just male, Thomas Butler's daughters were the legal successors, meaning it should have gone to Margaret Boleyn, the mother of Thomas Boleyn. Supported by King Henry VIII, Margaret's son, Thomas Boleyn, asserted his own claim to the earldom. The quick way to fix this dispute over the earldom was to get Anne Boleyn to marry Piers Butler. But she can't do that if she marries Henry Percy. The following scene depicts Cromwell leaving his family to join his employer, with dialogue in the subsequent scene suggesting a passing of time. Wolsey mentions that King Henry VIII and Katherine have been married for 18 years, indicating that the story has moved forward to 1527 or 1528. Thomas Cromwell gets a letter from Gregory. This is his son. Gregory Cromwell would go on to marry Elizabeth Seymour, the sister of Queen Jane Seymour. Thomas Cromwell then comments on Gregory's poor Latin, to which he chimes in that his daughter Anne is a much better scholar. This may or may not be true, but Gregory was well educated and received a better education than his father had. But my main point with this is that Anne then comments that her brother Gregory hardly knows any Greek, but she wanted to learn, which sets up a recurring theme of the Greek language in this episode. Thomas Cromwell and his daughter Grace are reading a prayer book. This prayer book is a book of hours. We can see this prayer book in Cromwell's infamous portrait, and Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn owned a copy of the same book. Wolsey then recounts how Katherine of Aragon came over from Spain and married Prince Arthur, and how she didn't know a word of English, but danced wonderfully. We know this to be true, as it was reported that at her wedding to Arthur, she danced in a very stately manner, clicking castanets. Henry, the Duke of York, whipped off his gown and whirled his sister Margaret across the floor, leaping and twirling to the music. We also know that by 1507, Katherine still couldn't speak English, as it is thought that Katherine communicated with those at the English court through other languages such as Latin. Wolsey then talks about how Katherine claimed to be a virgin, and her lack of male heir was proof that she was not a virgin, and that she had indeed slept with Arthur, something that is still debated today. Again, this was thought to be true, at least by King Henry VIII, as he decided to start quoting Leviticus chapter 20. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless. Despite the fact that they weren't childless, as they had the Princess Mary. But okay, Henry. Cromwell then mentions how Katherine of Aragon wanted to send King Henry VIII the head of the Scottish king. This is referring to the Battle of Flodden. The Battle of Flodden was a battle between the English and the Scottish. Henry was in France at the time, so King James IV took his opportunity to attack England under Catherine's regency. The win is often accredited to Henry, but ultimately it was Catherine's victory, and King James IV of Scotland was not only defeated, but he was killed in action. Katherine, revelling in her win, proposed sending King James's embalmed and wax corpse to Henry in France as proof of her victory. But even the English thought that was a bit much. At the dinner table, Eustace Chapuis speaks to Thomas More, the Lord Chancellor, in a language he assumes that Cromwell doesn't understand. However, he does, and tells Chapuis that if he wishes to speak in secret, then he should try Greek. A callback to earlier in the episode with Cromwell's children learning Greek. Later on in the episode, when Cromwell's daughter Anne dies, once again it is mentioned that Anne wanted to learn Greek. Cromwell then says, "The rumour is the king has moved on from Mary Boleyn to her flat-chested sister." This is reference to the fact that Mary Boleyn was, even if it was briefly, King Henry VIII's mistress, and the flat-chested sister is of course Anne Boleyn. Cromwell's wife Elizabeth is sat by the window embroidering, and she mentions that it's the same design that the Queen uses for the King's shirts. She is referring to Katherine of Aragon. We know that Katherine of Aragon did indeed sew the King's shirts. The historical records show that Anne Boleyn reacted angrily upon learning that a servant of the Privy Chamber was delivering linens to Queen Katherine for embroidering the King's shirts. Katherine had continued this personal task even after Henry's marriage to Anne, showing her devotion through the intimate act of sewing his garments. Henry, it seems, liked how Katherine did his shirts, and stepped in on one occasion to confirm that he did request Katherine's work on the linens. Nevertheless, Anne insisted that any future shirts for the king to be sent through her directly. Even after Anne's coronation, Katherine held herself as the rightful queen. She commissioned new liveries for her household, boldly embroidered with the initials H and K, something, as the Dowager Princess of Wales, she shouldn't have done. Grace Cromwell wears angel wings in this episode. angel wings form the arms of the House of Seymour. The name of this series is taken from Wolf Hall, or Wolf Hall but spelled slightly different, which was the family home of the Seymours. Jane Seymour would be Henry's third wife, the wife after Anne Boleyn, and the main character in season 2. She appears briefly in this episode, calling Mary Boleyn back to Anne Boleyn's side. Grace Cromwell's angel wings also foreshadow her death in this episode. It's unclear with the chopping and changing of timelines, but the wave of sweating sickness that claimed the lives of Cromwell's wife and 2 daughters could be the same wave that Anne Boleyn caught. Anne caught the sweating sickness in 1528, and Cromwell's wife died in 1529. So it's slightly off, but we are also dealing with historical fiction. So Hilary Mantel might have stitched these 2 together. Cromwell makes conversation with a young man named Mark, who is holding a musical instrument, when he visits Anne Boleyn. This is Mark Smeaton, one of the 5 men who was accused of adultery with Anne Boleyn and ultimately executed. The dog that runs towards Cromwell is called Percoy. This was the name of Anne's dog. Anne Boleyn pronounces Cromwell's name as Cromwell with a French accent. This spelling actually appears in historical records, as French and Italian correspondents used it in the state papers. The Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis used this spelling in letters to Emperor Charles V, and an Italian sculptor documented it on a receipt for a payment made on the king's behalf by Cromwell. Spelling at the time was highly inconsistent, and names often varied within the same document. Cromwell himself was frequently addressed as Thomas Cromwell, and often signed his name that way. The fact that Anne speaks with a very good French accent and fluently in French is a nod to her having spent time at the courts of King Francis I of France and Margaret of Austria in Brussels. It was said that Anne could pass for a native Frenchwoman. Claire Foy, who plays Anne Boleyn, and Kate Phillips, who plays Jane Seymour, have also worked on The Crown in 2016 as Queen Elizabeth II and Venetia Scott, respectively. The speech Katherine gives at Blackfriars is taken straight from George Cavendish's account.
For 20 years I have been your true wife, and by me you have had many children. Although it pleased God to call them from this world, which was no fault of mine. And when you had me first, as God is my witness, I was a true maid, without touch of man. And whether this is true or not, I put to your conscience.
Thomas Brodie Sangster's character, Ralph Sadler, recalls how Arthur, the Prince of Wales, said he had been in Spain the night after his wedding to Katherine of Aragon, when talking about the trial at Blackfriars, about whether Arthur and Katherine consummated their marriage. He says, he was 15, he was boasting. This represents the view that many historians take today. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed this, please give this video a like and check out the rest of the series if it's up by this time. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to learn more about the Tudors, I have several videos and playlists about monarchs, consorts, and key locations, including on this day in history. And until the next one, have a wonderful day. Bye!